So, if you love classic cars, vintage machines and the stories that drive them, motorheritage.org.au is your hub for preserving Australia's rich motoring past.
A few years back, bit of a long story. 30 odd years ago, my wife gave me a 1916 compass. Does everyone know what a British Army marching compass is? The old brass compasses that were usually in a lovely little leather case. Anyway, this one was made in 1916 in London, and I kept it and used it quite a lot. And but I'd always wondered, did it have a story and whose it had been? And after we moved house, 5 or 6 years ago, I was unpacking everything and ran across the compass. I pulled it out of its case, and I saw that in the bottom of the case was a piece of what looked like linen, green from the verdigris from the brass. I said, actually, what is that? And I pulled it out and looked at it, and I saw it was a hand-drawn map, just a little map about this big, hand-drawn from a training exercise in 1916, and I could make out on it there was the name, second letter, 2LT, ED, Astley. So I promptly Googled, and sure enough, bang, it immediately comes up. Captain Edward Dugdale Astley from Hungerford in Berkshire, which was where Wendy had bought the compass from an antique shop. So Edward Astley had come out of school in 1916, went through officer training and straight to the Somme. In his first battle, he led 15 men, the only survivors from the 500 who were attacking a German trench called Munich Trench. He leapt in with his pistol and he bailed up, with 10 men, he bailed up 50 Germans and marched them back out and then dispatched them back and then went along the trench and captured some more. He went on through the war until he was killed in June the 1st, 1918, i.e. towards the end of the war, by a German shell when they were 10 miles behind the lines. Usually in the mornings the Germans would lob a few shells far behind as morale breakers. Anyway, Edward was killed and his effects were sent back to his sister in Hungerford, and down the years his effects were passed on and ended up in the antique shop where Wendy bought them. Anyway, when I discovered this, I thought I'm going to take the compass back to his grave, because everything's well documented. So I knew where his grave was, and I thought I should take his compass in a car that's befitting a young army officer. So I rang Bentley and said, could I borrow a Continental? And they said, well, we've got a convertible, would you like that? So off we went. We went to his grave, but by then I'd started reading a lot about the First World War, and I started reading much more about the Aussies and about General John Monash. And the connection here is that this picture is taken at the junction where the Australian 3rd Division memorial is. After that, we went on down to Monash's headquarters at a place called Chateau de Betongle. And Monash is significant because it was really he and his tactics that led to the Allied victory in the First World War. He planned the battle on the 4th of July, the first one that involved Americans. On the 4th of July, he planned a battle that for the first time properly coordinated infantry, tanks, machine guns, telephones, and aircraft doing resupply. The battle was, he set a target of 20 minutes. They obtained complete victory in 19 minutes, absolutely unheard of in the First World War, because what they were doing was that as the infantry would go forward, the aircraft would then just come along and drop new supplies of ammunition, particularly for the machine guns. So they were all able to keep going in this leapfrogging manner, backed by the tanks. the British High Command then had thought, hello, this is remarkable, and they dispatched a large number of senior officers down to Monash's headquarters and had him explain to them, and they then, within 24 hours, produced a pamphlet and told all the other officers, this is how we now do battles. Well, the war was over by the 11th of November, and that was all by adopting Monash's tactics. So subsequently, many people regard John Monash as the greatest general of the British and Commonwealth forces in the First World War. But when he came back to Australia, he wasn't particularly appreciated because he hadn't been a full-time officer before the war, and he was Jewish. So he was never really accorded the credit that he deserved. Anyway, that was my little homage to John Monash and the Aussies who were there. That story, Convoy, about the 3 Lamborghinis, a guy wrote to me to say, look, it's coming up the 40th anniversary of the Convoy story. I've got some Lamborghini buddies. If we got some cars together, do you fancy doing it again? Okay. So I got onto Lamborghini and asked if I could borrow a modern car so that we had something modern as well as just the historics. They kindly gave me that Hurricane Spider. Waiting at the factory, we went a week before, several of us, to recce a route back to England, because the original route I'd taken was largely not motorway until we got to France, but it is now, so we didn't want to just take motorways all the way. So we picked up the old route, and Peter kindly told me about a particular road in Italy that's remarkable, and everyone should drive that if you get the chance. So we flew into all the Lamborghini owners. There were 14, drove their cars down. We all met at the Lamborghini factory. I jumped into that with my daughter, and we had a wonderful trip back. Along the way, the road that Peter had told me about, the SS.
It's the Trentino road to the west, and it is a hill climb, and the road is closed one weekend a year, and I think it's 16 k's of hill climb, so a proper hill climb, not one of our puny little Australian ones.
The Hurricane, of course, was roundly poo-pooed for its uninvolving handling. But I remember talking to the Lamborghini's chief engineer about it and how they'd built systems into it that made it almost impossible to get it to oversteer. They picked up systems from stabilizing systems from aircraft and built that into it around the central computer. So the car would anticipate if you're going to get out of shape, but in a more extreme way than many other self-preservation systems were having. But over a week of driving it, I really enjoyed it because with my daughter on board and me now getting somewhat on in years, I found I could use all of its performance very often without having a problem. So I was actually grateful to Lamborghini for building that system into it. I think it's called Piattaforma. Yes, it is, Piattaforma system. Anyway, they've taken a lot of flack for it, but when you understand a lot of how much the wide variety of people who are buying modern Lamborghinis, you could see why they would try to build in systems that prevented people doing themselves a bit of damage.
And this is the last.
Okay. Wow, I love the modern McLarens. I think they're fantastic. The thing about them too is that they're easy to drive and they have vision. So among the modern supercars, they are very pleasant to live with, just to do ordinary things in, as well as go to somewhere like Derbyshire. It's the Peak District in Derbyshire. Anyway, McLaren kindly lent me that one for a large birthday of Wendy's, so we went off wandering in Derbyshire for a couple of days, and she drove half the time, never driven a car as fast as that, of course, but even she, sorry, not even she, of course, but an inexperienced elderly woman driver was able to get great pleasure from that car. So I admire too what McLaren have done in making their cars accessible to people who don't have high levels of driving skills. And of course, we had a wonderful time.
Of course. Well, if there are any questions, please ask.
Well, if
Warwick.
you could pick one moment in your illustrious career as the pinnacle of driving experience or somebody that you've met, what would it be?
Imprinted on my mind, Warwick, during that trip from Monaco back to Sant'Agata with Bob Wallace, was the moment when on one of those rickety old two-lane Italian autostradas, we're doing, I don't know, 140 miles an hour, I suppose, up ahead, a lumbering flatbed truck, you can see, pulls out to pass a Bambino, and he's doing 40 or 50 miles an hour. So Bob, despite reading the road as far ahead as possible, you weren't ever going to see that one happening. So as our speed came down, it looked like we were going to run into the back of the truck, but the speeds equalised just about the time the nose of the Countach was about to touch the diff of the truck, because we are under the back of this flatbed truck, and I am looking up at the planks of this truck. Cool, calm Bob, not a problem. Never got to the brakes to the point of lock-up, just kept modulating and modulating. And as the truck began to move back over, he just calmly selected second, and past we went. Never changed expression, never batted an eyelid. For me, I'll always see the planks of that truck. That was a pretty unforgettable moment.
I remember being with Peter Robinson going out to Pastorate drag strip one day, and the same thing happened with you. The guy pulled over with a tractor with a trailer on the back, came up behind him.
Were we in a 350 Monaro?
I can't remember the car, but I remember the moment. Very similar experience, so I understand what you went through.
That Nick's GTO as well, I feel incredibly privileged to have had such a time with that car and given complete freedom. Because, you know, small magazines like we were producing had very small staffs, and a car magazine for the first 4 or 5 years, it was just me as editor and Wendy as the art director. So you're somewhat busy getting a magazine out, planning the content, writing some of it, commissioning the rest, and then editing it all, putting it together. So I never had much time, and it had dawned on me a few years back that I probably never really thanked Nick Mason as I should have, beyond just sending out a magazine with a compliment slip saying thanks. So I rang him up and said, look, I think I never really thanked you properly for lending me your cars. Can I take you and buy you a lunch? Anyway, you tell me where you'd like to go. Anyway, he nominated a place in Marylebone in London, and off we went and had a nice lunch. And at the end of it, I said, well, look, thank you. He said, actually, it's me who should be saying thank you to you, because while Elton John, Rod Stewart, all the other guys like me who have car collections, but they've all just been labelled as wealthy rock stars with a few cars, I have become known and respected as a serious collector of cars because of the stories that you wrote about my cars and me. And in a couple of them, I never even mentioned his name, or certainly never mentioned Pink Floyd, only that it was Nick Mason's car. And so I've never been branded as just a rich rock star with who can afford some cars. And he said it led to another business I started to get requests, could I borrow the cars? So I set up a business to let film production companies, etc., borrow the cars. And he said, had we never made another penny from Pink Floyd, I'd have done well enough out of my car hire business. So thank you. Very gracious, I thought.
What's the most diabolically bad car you have ever?
Do you remember the Hillman Hunter we took out? We used to use a dirt back road out to Castlereagh, and it had some fearsome corrugations on it. Do you remember that bloody Hillman Hunter that would go around there and go completely sideways because of the axle tramp? You could barely catch a thing. That was pretty bad.
Hunter won the Sydney, London, the Sydney Marathon.
Not quite the standard car.
I think perhaps two of the worst cars that Australia produced were the was it a Leyland Marina? Leyland Marina 6,
yeah.
and the Ford Cortina 6. They were pretty terrible cars in dynamic terms.
Shocking nose heavy understeer, weren't they? Yeah, terrible.
Appalling.
Yeah. There were so many bad cars in the 70s until people began to get a grip on it. I have to say, and I hope I'm saying this with all, not immodestly, but we have had an effect in this. For example, Peter wrote a story in Autocar about the Mark 3 Escort, 4 Escort.
1990, whatever.
Yeah, 1990, new
91.
Escort. That was a mediocre car in the extreme. You tell what you concluded about it.
Well, we did a comparison. The launch was in Geneva. What should have told us everything we needed to know was that there were no engineers at the launch. There were PR people. And we took 3 rivals, and the cover line of Autocar read, "New Escort meets its rivals, ... and loses." And it was clearly there was a Fiat Tipo, an Vauxhall Astra and a Golf. They were better cars than this.
At the end of their lives.
Yes, that's
They
right.
were all at the end of their lives.
That's right.
And the Escort had been, of course, the biggest selling car in Britain and was a great cash cow for Ford. And what they'd done was just spend as little money as possible on essentially a facelifted model, wasn't it? So
They weren't happy, were they?
They weren't happy. Unintended consequences, but the day that issue of Autocar came out, Autocar comes out on a Wednesday, and so all the main newspaper journalists were getting onto the plane to go to the launch of this car that morning, all carrying their copies of Autocar. So rather than reading the press kit on the plane, if they were ever going to do that, they were reading their copies of Autocar, so they all got off before they drove this car, knowing that it was mediocre to say the least. And so everyone wrote the same thing. They felt safe because Autocar, Journal of Record, had said it. Well, within a very short time, I had a phone call from Ian McAllister, who was CEO of Ford UK, demanding an apology, that we were completely wrong and that we should retract this, and that he wanted to see myself, the Autocar's editor, and the advertising director in his office at Brentwood. So off we go. And when the instant we walked in, he said, "You bastards have killed the Escort," because already they could see where this was going to go. "You bastards have killed the Escort. This is Sir Ian McAllister," as he subsequently was. And he thumped his table and said, now I want to know what you're going to do about it. what I want you to do is to retest the car, admit that you were wrong, the car's fine, etc. So I said, well, look, Ian, we'll never do that. Actually, Autocar as a brand is older than Ford. We've been going since 1895. So we have a longer brand heritage than you do, and editorial integrity is everything for us and publications like ours. And if we are not to tell the truth or write as we find, then we're ultimately out of business. So we won't be doing that. And he then turned to our advertising director and said, well, what about you? How much money are you going to lose if I cancel all our advertising? Well, there was many hundreds of thousands of pounds.
300,000, you told.
350. So this guy, our advertising director's name's Simon Dorks. So Dorksy said, look, I'm sorry, Ian, I agree completely with Mel and Bob, the editor. We will not be doing what you want. So he said, right, I'm going to ring the ad agency. So he picked up his phone and he called Ogilvy and Mather, asked for the Ford, straight to the Ford account director, and he said, I'm telling you now, cancel all advertising that's going into Haymarket magazines. It's quite a big company with about 100 publications altogether. Cancel any ads that are booked for Haymarket. So it's fairly serious across the company. I said, fine, okay, fine, if that's what you want to do. So we left. The next day we had a board meeting and we were looking through the Ford projections, and I said, well, Simon and I have got something we need to tell you about. We're going to be having a hit of all the Ford advertising across the group, and told them what had happened. And I don't need to say to their credit, but the company's owner, Michael Heseltine, former Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, and he was the chairman, and the CEO both said, absolutely right. How dare he think that he could ask any publication, let alone one of ours, to do that? Well, guess what? A few months later, because the magazine was had a position and was powerful, all the ads began to dribble back because the ad agency knew they were better off having ads in there. But the real point of the story, sorry I've kind of diverted here, is that caused such ructions within inside Ford, and they knew they couldn't go on making cars like that, engineering down to the last fraction of a cent, that they had to make a dramatic change. And there was a young man called Richard Parry-Jones who was on his way to run the Ford plant in Portugal, and one of his seniors rang and said, Richard, you're not going to Portugal, you are now going to be head of engineering in charge of all new product. Ultimately, Richard became Ford's global product chief with 35,000 engineers and designers reporting to him. But it was Richard's liberation there that then transformed the Mondeo into a good car and led to the Ford Focus that had such a profound effect on everyone else because of its ride and handling and good to drive dynamics. Yeah. Have I got that right?
You have. What was interesting about the Focus was that the Mark 5 or Mark 4 Golf had been signed off, and Ferdinand Piëch, who was running the Volkswagen group, all-powerful 30, drove it, realised that they had to do something, and they pulled out the torsion beam rear suspension and put in a multi-link rear suspension in order to match the Focus's dynamic qualities.
He also got on the phone and tried to hire Richard Parry-Jones to be chief engineer at Volkswagen. When Richard inquired how much he might be paid, Piëch discovered Richard was actually being paid more than he was.
So they went one rung down and got a bloke called Ulrich Eichhorn, who had been one of the head chassis engineers, and a lovely bloke.
And has just retired a few months ago as Chief Technical Officer of the entire Volkswagen Group. Yeah. He's the bloke who made the current Bentleys so good.
Yes.
He is a lovely bloke too. He's now got, I asked him the other day, what are you up to, Uli? He said, well, I've got this new company. We're doing global mineral exploration by satellite. He said, we've just found some very large deposits no one knew about in Congo, all from satellite technology. So, anyway. More questions?
What are your views on the current problem of electric cars and the devastating effect it's having on the current auto manufacturers?
We owe so much of the chaos and the consequences to politicians for trying to force the manufacturers down an electrified route without allowing other options. The responsible manufacturers were and wished to pursue all available options, and maybe pure EV wasn't or isn't the best pathway, but because of political pressure in so many countries, that's pushed the whole EV thing. And so they're all now in a very difficult place, having committed themselves to EV build programs, but EV sales are lagging, because any big city where, as I do, you live in a house with no driveway, charging is difficult. We don't have enough public chargers, so there's strong resistance for obvious reasons to people wanting to have or being able to have an EV. So the demand, as Toyota very correctly, I feel, understood for hybrids as a better balance. Meanwhile, explore the other options with hydrogen, etc. Have I answered your question, do you think? Sorry, we just know, I'm about to write a story about product planning. Does everyone know what a product planner is in the automotive industry? These are the guys who are tasked with the job of figuring out where markets are going, where trends will be, what opportunities there will be, and what they should build to meet which demands, and what opportunities there are. And then
in 5 years' time.
Yes, so they're the strategists, and then they can make a recommendation for engineers and designers to conceive cars to meet certain market targets. Well, once I started looking at this story, and you start talking to them, you can see the word coming back is that they now have this extraordinarily difficult job of trying to understand even the shorter term future, let alone 5 years and beyond, and the consequences of not having that certainty when you're involving billions and billions of dollars of investment is terrifying. So there's this great fear through the industry because of the uncertainty of not being able to back a smoothly developing electric vehicle pathway. It's all gone chaotic again.
One of the things that I've noticed about virtually every photograph that you've had today is that the designers behind every of those vehicles have all been aiming for lighter weight, greater strength, more speed, and handling. Would any of these designers have designed an electric vehicle on any of those premises?
It's all gone a bit wrong with EVs, hasn't it? Because without having to stick an engine under a bonnet, you've got a great deal more freedom. But what people want are big, bluff-looking SUVs with high fronts. So the low fronts that we could have and probably should have been having just haven't happened because of market pressures. I'm not sure I completely understood. So you talked about...
I'm suggesting that virtually all of you've been terribly biased and showed us cars that are wonderful to look at, and all of the flash stuff, and none of the banal garbage that drive today. But all of the premise behind most of those cars was lighter weight.
Yeah.
They all went to try to get a lighter car, a lighter chassis. They made cars out of composite materials, and they were all done for, that was the main basic premise to it. I can't think of any of the so-called modern polluting vehicles that come in under the weight of even the heaviest of these vehicles. They're all heavier. Are they safe? No one knows. But And then my other subsequent question to you was going to be, in the years of your career, do you feel that it has come to government, I think you mentioned, did it come to government to decide on what our motoring future should be, or was it the manufacturers? And I personally think that most of it's been deluded by people in government who claim that we can't exceed the speed limit by 1 kilometre an hour because it's dangerous, but going to sleep at the road because you're driving a boring vehicle is quite safe.
You're absolutely right. The main pressures, a lot of them unfortunate, have come from legislators who absolutely don't understand. Many of those requirements have made cars have to be heavier, bigger frontal areas, all that sort of for a pedestrian. And all of that usually adds weight and complexity, airbags, all of that. But then as soon as you begin to cross over into the EV territory, and you've got to accommodate batteries, whether you're going to have a full EV or not, obviously very heavy, but if hybrid, or the provision within the car to ultimately be hybrid, just going to add a great deal of weight. Also, people seem to feel safer in bigger, heavier things, hence the sales of the big trucks have all been expanding all around the world. Even in the UK now, we see loads of Ford Raptors and, you know.
No, we don't have time. Sorry, Peter, no more questions. Sorry, no, you've had your go.
Mel, just
This will be the last.
can you just explain why you left Car Magazine, and also how you started with Autocar and difference between the two?
Okay, I had a truly wonderful time at Car and complete freedom. It's an extraordinarily privileged and probably in many fields a rare thing to have the kind of freedom that we did and many other editors in the situation.
Well, especially you at Car, and Steve subsequently under Ian Fraser.
Yeah, Ian Fraser, who was one of the two owners of the magazine, guy from Melbourne, started on the Melbourne Herald, and then went to Wheels, and then his predecessor Doug Blaine took him to the UK. Ian edited Car, and then ended up being, along with Blaine, initially one of the owners. But he absolutely is a principled man who would never would tolerate any kind of impingement of editorial integrity. So we knew that we had absolutely the backing and the trust of the owner to say as we spoke. So I had a wonderful time doing that. And what I learned was, crucially, whereas as a journalist working for a newspaper, or if you're not the editor, you're doing a more single job, you're writing or you're sub-editing, whatever. But as editor, you're working with an art director. And I was lucky to work with extremely good art directors who taught me that the sum of 1 and 1, i.e. editor and art director, is a damn sight more than 3. You create this wonderful thing that comes out every month or every week. So having done that for 7 years, I thought, you know what though, I'm getting married, maybe I need to start earning some money. So I began to think about other things. And I realised there was an opportunity to bring our kind of editorial skills, to make them available to companies. So I approached an advertising, then seriously good ad agency in London, to say, look, I could make publications for companies, customer magazines, etc., airline magazines, that sort of thing. You guys have got clients and the facilities, and you know how to manage a creative business. And they said, great idea, let's do it. So we set up a 50-50 company and got rolling. Very quickly had big clients, Ford, GM, Volkswagen, Audi, P&O, British Army, Boots, a big chain of chemists in the UK, started making quite a lot of money, which I thought was very nice. But I realised that I made a serious cock-up in not hiring a good CEO to run the company, and I was trying to do it all myself. And I got to the point of fatigue where I couldn't cope anymore. But also, I found that I'd had all this freedom through my journalistic career, and having to deal with somebody like a Ford marketing director who, after a very expensive shoot of a whole new range of Fords, rejected all the photographs because he couldn't see all four wheels. Well, think how many times when you photograph a car, you're going to see all four wheels. And this guy wasn't having it. It's not possible to show all four wheels on every picture of every car. And I thought, that's it, I can't do this anymore. At about the same time, Haymarket, the company that was started by Michael Heseltine before his political career with two colleagues, and had a quite wide range of titles. They had one called Campaign, which is for the advertising and marketing community, a weekly. When Campaign came out on Thursday mornings, everybody in the advertising and marketing world would stop to read it. A really good magazine that was telling people a lot of stories from inside advertising that even those in it didn't know. Anyway, this Campaign was immensely powerful. Haymarket got in touch with me to say, look, the editor of Campaign is leaving, we need a new editor. You're the only journalist we know who's been a successful magazine editor and understands something about and is sympathetic to advertising, because I'd been working inside an agency for 4 years. Will you come and edit Campaign? It was a very tempting job, but Wendy was pregnant. I knew that I knew what that editorship involved. It meant the good stories weren't going to come out of lunches with Charles Saatchi or Martin Sorrell, ran the world's biggest ad group. They were going to come out in bars late at night or in country house parties on the weekend, and I knew the toll that had taken on Bernard Barnett, who'd been the editor of Campaign. His marriage had fallen apart and all that stuff. And I thought, you know what, I don't think I can do that. Well, 6 months later, they came back and said, forget Campaign, will you come and be our editorial director? And start by sorting out Autocar, which they had just bought. Another nice story there. So am I going on too long?
Yes, you are. No, prescient. But that has to be it. We have to stop.
The world's two oldest car magazines, Autocar launched 1895, Motor launched 1903. In the 60s, came under the ownership of the same company, IPC, who wouldn't allow them to compete. They both had to have the same car on the cover every week, etc. And so, of course, their sales are dropping. Autocar was the more fuddy-duddy of the two. Its sales had dropped more. But Haymarket's CEO, Simon Taylor, a proper car nut who'd been reading Autocar since he was 5 years old, knew that it was actually the more valuable. But they knew that if they approached IPC directly to say, will you sell us Motor, they'd smell a rat and wouldn't. So off they went and said, look, will you sell us Motor? You guys have lost the plot. You say the classified ad sales are all plummeting. You know you're beaten, been beaten by Car, Top Gear, What Car, etc. Sell us Motor. And they said, well, we won't sell you Motor, but we will sell you Autocar. So Haymarket got Autocar for a remarkably low price, and then set about making it into a vibrant magazine again. And so that was one of my first jobs at Haymarket, where I had a wonderful time, and then the very good fortune to have Mr. Robinson arrive to stay in my house just at the point I was looking for a European editor. And he and Erica decided to go. And I have to say one more thing. As you all know, Peter likes to ask questions rather bluntly, and he does tend to poke people in the chest. a short time after his arrival and attendance at a BMW launch, I had the rather pained PR director of BMW on the phone, a guy called Michael Schimke, saying, I have to ask you about your new Mr. Robinson. He was at our launch and he was talking to Herr von Grundheim and he was poking him in the chest. And he said, Michael said, he seems to be a very rude man. We don't think we can have him at a BMW launch again. And I said, okay, I understand, Michael. Now, look, Peter, as you will discover, is a truly wonderful journalist who only cares about understanding the maximum about cars and writing about them in the best informed way. As you know, he's Australian. We're all a bit blunt. You even know that from me. We're a bit blunt. You'll have to forgive him, and I'm sure it won't happen again, but please persist. Some years later, Michael Schimke becomes the PR director at Porsche.
And he rang me up one day and he said, we think you should drive a Boxster for the next year. So they gave me a Boxster for a year, which extended, I think, to 20 months.
Followed by
a couple of years later, he said, would you be interested in a 911? So I had a 911. Courtesy of Porsche.
Yeah.
But he's much too kind.
So Herr Schipke did truly see that Peter was a profoundly good journalist and that BMW absolutely needed to have him along on every launch. One final thing, one day at the launch of the Mercedes C-Class, I got back a little bit early from the drive and I saw that Werner Breitschford, the Mercedes
Jürgen Hubert,
sorry, the Mercedes CEO was just sitting looking at his watch. I went and had a yarn with him and he said, I need to get away. He said, but I will not leave until I've heard the views of two journalists. One was Peter Robinson and the other was a bloke called Georg Kaha, the Austrian guy who I had hired as Car's German correspondent straight from university. And he never had another job in his life. He never had a job, actually. He's just gone on to be the most respected European journalist. Anyway, there's the Mercedes boss saying, I'm not leaving here until I've heard what Robbo and Big George, because he's 6'6", tell me about my new car.
This is my PR man.
Question. What's your opinion about this Jaguar goings on?
About the which?
Jaguar goings on. Is it long? I don't want to just a brief answer to me.
Yeah. There's a lot of hair tearing about Jaguar because we all have, so many of us have such affection for the brand, but talking to a couple of people who know say that through the JLR ownership, where they got on and have done a really brilliant job with Land Rover, but they didn't really quite understand about Jaguar and what to do with a brand that was not easy to handle in the modern world. You know, tried bigger volumes, that didn't work. So they've reached a point where they've had to do something, and as you see, they're doing something dramatic. Opinion, as you know, is completely split one way and the other.
I'm sorry, thank you very much. We've gone way over time. But I would like you to thank Mel for what he's been through.
Thank you all very much. It's been a treat to be here.
Love classic cars, vintage machines, and the stories that drive them. Motorheritage.org.au is your hub for preserving Australia's rich motoring past. From restoration tales to historic milestones, we're dedicated to keeping the spirit of classic motoring alive. Whether you're an enthusiast, collector, or just love the nostalgia of old-school horsepower, this is the place to be. Join the journey today. Motorheritage.org.au